73 years. I want you to just sit with that number for a second. 73 years. I mean, that is effectively a lifetime.
It really is.
If you were born 73 years ago, you were born before the internet, before space travel, before color TV was even standard. You've watched the entire world reinvent itself.
Oh, a dozen times over. In geopolitical terms, that's practically an eon. Empires can rise and fall in that kind of time frame.
Exactly. But the reason I'm throwing that number at you right now isn't to talk about how much things have changed. It's to talk about something that we're unpacking today has stayed remarkably, maybe even terrifyingly, the same.
Right.
We're looking at the situation in Iran, but not through the lens of this morning's headlines or even the last decade. We're looking at it through this massive, continuous 73-year arc.
And that's the challenge. If you're looking at Iran and you're only seeing the last 5 or 10 years, you aren't just missing context. You're actually seeing a manufactured reality.
Seeing the symptoms and mistaking them for the disease.
Precisely. That's the ideal.
And the premise here, it's genuinely provocative. It suggests that the current state of Iran, the inflation, the political hardliners, the social unrest, it isn't just a result of internal, bad governance. It's the result of what the source calls a continuous campaign of external interference.
Coups and economic abuse. That's the phrase that really jumps out.
It is a heavy accusation. It implies intent. So our mission on this deep dive is to test that argument. We're going to act as historians and maybe forensic accountants today.
Right.
We need to walk through this timeline, starting way back in the early 1950s, to see if the evidence really connects a coup over oil to the modern banking sanctions we see today.
And just to set expectations, the source isn't letting the Iranian government off the hook for corruption or mismanagement. That's a really important distinction.
Okay.
But it is asking us to zoom out and look at the external pressures that shapes that government. It's arguing that the Iran we see today is, a manufactured outcome, a specific playbook run on a loop for 7 decades.
So let's open that playbook. We have to rewind the clock. We are going back to 1951. World War II is over. The Cold War is just starting to freeze over. And in Iran, something big shifts.
This is the origin story. 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh is elected prime minister.
And he was elected democratically, right?
Oh, yes. We need to be clear about this. He wasn't a dictator. He was a very popular nationalist figure. And his first major move is the one that, it effectively sets the board for the next 73 years. He moves to nationalize the oil industry.
Now, usually when we hear nationalize oil, it sounds like such a dry policy decision, some bureaucrat signing papers.
Right.
But in 1951, this was essentially a declaration of independence, wasn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. You have to understand the context. This wasn't just some oil company operating in Iran. This was the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company.
Which most people today would know as BP.
Right, BP. And at the time, this company operated almost like a state within a state. British government owned a majority share and effectively treated Iranian oil as a British asset.
So Iran wasn't getting much out of it.
A pittance. The royalties were tiny compared to the wealth being extracted, the infrastructure, the profits, the control. It was all flowing out of the country.
So Mossadegh comes in and says, okay, the party's over. This belongs to the people of Iran.
Exactly. And the source argues this wasn't just political theater, it was a response to genuine economic exploitation. Mossadegh's whole argument was about sovereignty, that the immense wealth under Iranian soil should build Iranian schools and hospitals, not British fleets.
In an ideal world, you'd think that self-determination would be applauded. Good for you, taking control of your own destiny.
You would think, but the reaction was, the complete opposite. And this leads us to the first major trauma in this timeline. The response wasn't negotiation. It wasn't a new trade deal.
It was regime change.
It was regime change. This is 1953. 2 years later.
Only 2 years. Wow.
1953. The response to nationalization was a coordinated coup orchestrated by the CIA and British intelligence MI6.
Operation Ajax.
And Operation Boot.
It sounds like spy fiction, but this isn't a conspiracy theory. The documents are declassified. We know this happened.
We do.
But I want to dig into how it happened, because the source implies this set the template for everything that followed. They didn't just storm the palace with tanks right away, did they?
No, and that's the fascinating kind of dark art of it. The source highlights the psychological aspect. It wasn't just brute force. They bribed newspaper editors to print lies about Mossadegh. They hired street thugs to stage violent protests.
To create the illusion of chaos.
Exactly. It was all about manufacturing a narrative that Mossadegh was incompetent, maybe communist-leaning, dangerous, all to justify removing him.
So they create the chaos, and then they present themselves as the solution to the chaos they created.
Precisely. And the motivation, the source is explicit. It wasn't about spreading democracy. It was about securing the oil supply and making sure no other nation in the region got the same idea.
A warning shot.
It established a precedent. If you threaten the flow of resources to the West, sovereignty goes out the window.
So Mossadegh is out. Who do they put back in?
They restore the monarch, the Shah, Mohammad Pahlavi.
Okay, let's pause there. Because if we follow this logic, this moment, 1953, is the seed. You take out a democratic leader because he wants economic independence, and you install a king who is beholden to you.
And for the next 26 years, the Shah runs the country with an iron fist, backed by Western money, Western intelligence. The source points to the Savak, the Shah's secret police, which was notorious for torture and repression.
And this is crucial, because when we look at what happens next, we can't see it in a vacuum. We can't act like 1979 just fell out of the sky.
You're talking about the Islamic Revolution.
Right.
Now, in a lot of standard history books, or even just in the cultural imagination, 1979 is often presented as this sudden explosion of religious fundamentalism.
Yeah, like everyone just woke up one day and decided to be radical.
But you simply cannot understand 1979 without understanding 1953.
It's the pendulum swinging back.
A direct reaction. The argument here is that the revolution and the rise of Ayatollah Khomeini was the blowback from decades of perceived puppetry. The anti-Western sentiment wasn't just random, it was rooted in the memory of the coup and the long years of support for the Shah's repression.
So the source is basically saying that the hardline Iran we know today, the theocracy, was essentially baked in the oven of that 1953 intervention.
That is the core argument. Think about it. The West suppressed the secular, democratic, nationalist option, Mossadegh. So where did the opposition go?
Somewhere it could hide.
It moved to the mosque, which was one of the only places people could organize with relative safety. The result was a religious revolution because the secular path had been destroyed for them.
That is a critical connection. And as soon as that revolution happens, the region just ends. It effectively catches fire. We move into the 1980s, the Iran-Iraq War.
A devastating conflict, 8 years, hundreds of thousands dead. Trench warfare that looked like World War I, but with modern weapons.
Now, we're often told that Saddam Hussein was the bad guy of the region, or that this was just ancient Sunni-Shia hatred boiling over.
But the financial trail tells a very different story.
It does.
It does. This massive contradiction in the East versus West Cold War narrative. In the 1980s, who was supporting Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran?
I'm assuming the Soviets. They were close to the Ba'ath Party.
They were. But so was the United States, and the French, and the British. The source notes that while the U.S. was publicly at odds with the Soviet Union, both superpowers were effectively on the same side here.
Wait, what?
They were both funneling money, weapons, and intelligence to Iraq to fight Iran.
So the Cold War rivals were basically high-fiving over backing Saddam just to crush the Iranian Revolution.
Contain is the diplomatic word they used at the time, but the U.S. even provided satellite imagery to Iraq to help target Iranian troops, despite knowing Saddam was using chemical weapons.
That's a stark example of the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
It's more than that. The source argues this is a prime example of how propaganda works. The public narrative was about religious sectarianism or containing radicalism, but the strategic reality, according to this source, was simply punishing Iran for 1979. It was about making sure this new revolutionary government failed.
Or was at least so bogged down in blood and war that it couldn't function.
Exactly. It really strips away the moral high ground, doesn't it? It forces you to look at interests, not ideologies. The West didn't care about Saddam's human rights record then. They cared that he was a hammer they could use against Iran.
So we have a coup in '53, the proxy war in the '80s, then the Cold War ends. The physical wars calmed down a bit. But the source argues the war didn't stop. It just changed venues.
This is the transition to the modern era. The battlefield shifts from the trenches to the bank ledgers. This is what the source terms economic warfare.
Okay, I want to drill down on this.
Yeah.
Because we hear the word sanctions all the time. It sounds so bureaucratic. Oh, we just won't trade with them. But as a weapon.
Right. It sounds passive, doesn't it? Sanction sounds like a parking ticket. A siege. And we need to explain the mechanics here because the details really matter.
It's not just that the U.S. doesn't buy Iranian rugs.
No, it's about the weaponization of the U.S. dollar and the banking system. The source mentions SWIFT specifically.
SWIFT. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication.
Yes.
It's a terrible acronym. Sounds like a tailor shop.
It does, but think of SWIFT as the nervous system of global money. It's the messaging system banks use to say, I am sending money from Bank A to Bank B. It's how you pay for things across borders.
And if you're kicked off SWIFT,
you're effectively erased from the global economy. You cannot get paid for your oil. You cannot pay for imported wheat or medicine.
So it's not just about stopping the government from building missiles. It stops the regular person in Tehran from buying insulin.
That's the point. And the secondary sanctions. This is crucial. The U.S. says, we won't trade with Iran. But then they also say to France or Germany or Japan, if you trade with Iran, you can't do business with America.
So you force the rest of the world to choose the massive U.S. economy or the struggling Iranian economy. That's not really a choice. It's an ultimatum.
Correct. And this is designed to collapse the economy entirely. It causes hyperinflation. It destroys the middle class. The argument is that these are not peaceful alternatives to war. They are a form of collective punishment designed to make the population so miserable
that they overthrow their own government.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the why. Why go to these lengths? Is it really just about nuclear weapons? Because that's usually the justification we're given.
The headline, yeah.
The headline, but not the whole story. If you look at the 73-year arc, the motivation remains control. It's about ensuring that a nation that nationalized its resources, remember 1953, and rejected the Western order, remember in 1979, cannot be allowed to succeed on its own terms.
It's about making an example of them.
It's about the price of autonomy. If you step out of line, the economic machinery turns against you.
It's amazing how consistent that through line is, from Mossadegh to the current sanctions. And this leads to what this calls the cycle of interference.
This is the synthesis of the whole argument. And I want to be careful here. It is not saying the West invents all of Iran's problems. It admits there is corruption, there is mismanagement, there is genuine internal anger.
Right. We aren't saying everything is a CIA plot. The people protesting have legitimate grievances.
No doubt. But the strategy described is wait. Wait for that internal discontent to arise naturally, because people get unhappy in every country. Inflation happens everywhere. And when it does...
inflame it.
Inflame it, that's the word. Pour gasoline on the spark. Use that moment of vulnerability to push for the regime change you've wanted since 1979.
Every major crisis follows this rhythm. A spark happens internally, maybe the price of gas goes up, and external pressure turns that spark into an inferno.
Yeah.
It completely changes how you consume the news. Because if you see a protest in Tehran tonight, your first instinct is to think, look, the people want freedom. And that might be true.
It is often true.
But this perspective forces you to ask a second question. Okay, who is amplifying this? Who is funding the narrative around it? And do they actually care about the people protesting, or do they just want the government to fall?
It strips away the innocence of the observer. You have to ask about the geopolitical incentives. If the goal for 73 years has been to destabilize, then any internal instability becomes an asset to be exploited.
It's the difference between a building collapsing because the architect was bad and a building collapsing because someone has been taking a sledgehammer to the foundation every night for 7 decades.
That is the perfect analogy to see the sledgehammer. Because if we don't, we judge the architect, the Iranian people, or their government unfairly. We ignore the external sabotage.
So let's recap this journey. We started with the original sin, the 1953 coup against Mossadegh for the crime of nationalizing oil,
which led directly to the Shah, the repression, and the inevitable explosion of the 1979 revolution.
Which was then punished by the Iran-Iraq War, funded by the very powers that claimed to stand for global stability.
Leading to the modern era of economic warfare, swift bans and sanctions designed to crush the economy from the inside out.
All culminating in this cycle where internal pain is weaponized for external gain.
It's a sobering picture. It really challenges the simple good guys versus bad guys narrative we love so much.
It does. And look, we aren't here to say one side is angels and the other is demons, but we are here to say that the story is much, much deeper than what fits in a tweet.
Real history rarely fits into good guys versus bad guys. It's usually about interests, power, and resources. The source material is just asking us to be adults about this history, to understand that the anger we see coming from Iran isn't irrational. It's a response to trauma.
So here's where we leave you today. We've walked through the timeline. We've looked at the receipts, so to speak. My question to you, listening to this, is this.
It's a question of perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Next time you see a headline about the Middle East, or really anywhere where major resources are at stake, just stop. Ask yourself, am I looking at a snapshot or am I looking at a single frame in a 73-year-long movie?
And who's directing that movie?
Right. How much of what we call news is actually just history repeating itself by design? It's uncomfortable to ask, but I think the deep dive demands we ask it.
It's the only way to really understand the world.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you on the next one.